Hey everyone, Jamie here from TechnicalCafe.com, and in this tutorial we're going to be talking about how to make a pretty simple animated loading bar using a combination of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And we're also going to be using a little bit of the Bootstrap library as well. So this is what our loading bar is going to look like. It's going to say loading at the top, and beneath this it's going to have a gray background, and when we click on this load button here, this blue striped color is going to fill in the gray background. So this doesn't necessarily have to be implemented using a load button. For example, you could have it pop up if you're loading data from a database and you know it's going to take a while, or you could have it pop up in a modal or something when you're first loading a web page, something like that. So feel free to implement this the way you want to. The purpose of this tutorial is just kind of show you how we can play around with JavaScript and make this sort of thing work. So let's jump over to Visual Studio Code and take a look at what we're going to need to actually go ahead and set this up. So we're going to need three files for this: an index.html file, a styles.css file, and a script.js file. And all of these are empty at this time. So what we're going to do is actually go ahead and start off with our index.html file. And in order to do that, we're just going to go ahead and type in an exclamation mark and hit tab. And Emmet, which is the plugin I'm using in Visual Studio Code, it's also available for Atom as well, if you're using that text editor, is going to autocomplete our HTML boilerplate here. So the first thing I'm going to do is jump over here to our title, and what we're going to do there is just change this to say animated progress bar. The next thing we're going to do is actually include our CSS files, including the Bootstrap library. So what we're going to do is jump back over to Google Chrome, head on over to getbootstrap.com, click on Get Started here, and then we're going to scroll down to where it says CSS, and we're just going to copy this link here. If we jump back over to Visual Studio Code, we can paste this in right here, and then we should have access to the Bootstrap library now. Alright, so the next thing we're going to want to do is add in our local styles.css file so we can apply some of our own custom styles to our progress bar. So in order to do that, we're just going to say link rel equals style sheet, and then we're going to go ahead and also give it an href of styles.css. So we're also going to want to add in our JavaScript, but we'll do that a little bit later on in the tutorial once we've already established what this progress bar is going to look like, and once we have all of our styles set in stone. So the next thing we're going to do is jump into our body section, and within this body section is where we're going to start writing the code to create the actual progress bar itself. We're going to start off by creating a div with a class of bar_container. And what this is going to do is basically allow us to hold the progress bar. It's going to allow us to hold that text that says loading. And it's also going to allow us to hold the load button as well. So within this, we're going to actually now include our Bootstrap. And in order to do that, we're just going to say, we're going to create a div with a class of progress. And within this div here, what we're going to do is create another div with several different classes, including progress-bar and progress-bar-striped. We're also going to have to add a couple of additional attributes. So we're going to add an attribute, an ID actually, of progress1. And this is what we're going to be using within our own styles.css file to access this progress bar. And also what we're going to be using within our script.js file to access this progress bar. So the next thing we're going to do is add a role attribute, and we're going to set that to progress bar. And then we're going to add a couple of additional attributes, the first one of which is area-value now equals 0. We're going to add area-value min, set that equal to 0. We're going to add another one of area-value max is equal to 100. And now we should be good to go with our progress bar itself. So real quick, these are just the minimum value, the value that the progress bar is set to now, the minimum value it can have, and the maximum value that it can have. So if we save this and jump over to Google Chrome, we can take a quick look at it and see what we have so far. And you'll notice that right now the progress bar goes all the way across the whole top of the screen here. And what we want to do is set it so that it's a little bit smaller and that it looks a little bit nicer. And we also want to put in our loading text up there as well at the top of it. So let's jump back over to Visual Studio Code, and let's go ahead and add in the loading text just above this progress div here. So what we're going to do is say loading ... And one thing to note is if you add it within this, you'll see that, we'll show you this first, and then we'll go back and show you what happens if you add it inside the progress div. So now our loading appears outside of the div, outside of our progress bar, right on top of it. If we were to have added it inside of this progress div, you'll see that it's actually inside of the progress bar itself, and it kind of the progress bar will start here instead of at the end. So that can just create some problems. So we're just going to take that out here. And now what we're going to do is add in our button. We're going to want our load button to be within this bar container div. So what we're going to do is jump out here, and we're going to create a button. So button, we're going to assign it a type of button, and we're going to say onClick, and we're going to set this equal to just no value for right now because we still have to write our function, and we're then going to give it a value of load. So if we save this and we jump over to Google Chrome, you'll notice that we do have our button here. It's a little close to the progress bar itself, so what we're going to do is add in a line break in HTML. So we'll just jump over here and we'll add in a BR tag, and that should give it just a little bit of space. We could also go ahead and add in some CSS margin to achieve the same effect as well. So the next thing we're going to want to do now is go over to our styles.css file to actually go ahead and start changing up the width of the progress bar. So we're just going to jump over here, and we're going to reference it using our bar-container class, or bar_container class that we created. And then within this, we're just going to set a width of 50%. We're going to set a margin of 0 pixels auto, and what that's going to do is center the progress bar, and we're going to give it a margin top of 20 pixels, and that's going to lower it down from the top of the screen a little bit. So if we save this and head on over to Google Chrome, you'll notice that now we have something that looks a little bit more like what we started with. Actually looks exactly like what we started with the exception that the load button doesn't actually do anything. So now we have to write our JavaScript that's going to fill in this progress bar once we click the load button. So pretty simple JavaScript. Let's jump over to Visual Studio Code again, head on over to script.js, and we're going to start writing our JavaScript code to fill in this progress bar. So in order to achieve the gradual loading effect of the bar loading over the course of a couple of seconds, what we're going to do is actually create a function that causes 10% of the bar to fill in every 50 milliseconds. And we're not going to use a for loop for this because it'll actually cause the bar to load way too quickly. In fact, I actually tried it out, and it caused the bar to essentially just snap to being loaded without any kind of in between. So what we're going to do is start off by creating a variable to hold the progress of the bar. So we're going to say, let's create a comment here and say variable to hold loading progress. And we're going to call this variable fill. So we'll say let fill equals 0. And the reason it's 0 is because we're starting off with an empty progress bar. Then we're going to create a function to actually load the bar. So let's just have a comment here. So function to load the bar. And we're going to call this function load_bar. So within this function here, what we're going to actually do is use the setInterval function in JavaScript. So we're going to say window.setInterval. And this function here actually takes 2 parameters. One parameter is the code that we're going to run, and the next parameter is how often we're going to run that code. So we're going to actually have a function here, so we'll say function, and then this is where we're going to write our code to load the bar. And the second parameter we're going to have is the speed at which we're going to run this function. So we're going to run it every 50 milliseconds. And feel free to adjust this to get the effect that you'd like. 1,000 milliseconds is a second, so I figured that'll probably be a little bit too slow. So we'll try 50 and see what that looks like. So then we're just going to go into this function here, drop down into the function body, and we're going to start loading the bar. So in order to do that, we're just going to add value of 10 to the fill variable every iteration of this function. So we're going to say fill plus equals 10. And that's the same thing as saying fill equals fill plus 10. Just a shorthand way of doing it. So fill plus equals 10. And then what we're going to want to do is use some conditional statements to keep track of when the bar has been fully loaded. And if the bar has been fully loaded, we're just going to stop this setInterval function from running. So we're going to say if fill is exactly equal to 100, we're going to go ahead and clear the interval. So we're going to use a clear interval function, and that's all we have to do there. If the fill variable is not at 100, what we're going to do is say else, and we're just going to keep adding to it. So, and this is where we're actually going to load the bar. So we're going to say document.getElement by ID. And this is where we're going to use this progress_1 ID that we gave the progress bar when we were writing our HTML code. So if we jump back over here, we're just going to say progress_1, And I called it progress 1 just because it's our first progress bar. If you want to have a second or third or fourth or however you want to do this, feel free to do so, or feel free to change the name up to fit your needs. So within this, what we're going to want to do is adjust the style or the CSS related to this progress 1 bar. We're going to specifically want to adjust the width property. And we're just going to set that width property to whatever the value of fill is. And because width, we're going to be using a percentage, we're going to just append on here or concatenate on a % sign. And that should pretty much be it for our JavaScript code. But what we're going to have to do is actually now include this JavaScript code in our HTML file. And we're also going to have to set the onClick attribute to be equal to this load_bar function for our load button. So let's jump back over to index.html and let's set the onClick attributes to be load bar. And then the next thing we're going to want to do is actually include this JavaScript, and we're going to include this actually at the bottom of the page here so that the page can load before we start running the JavaScript. So we're going to say script src equals script.js, and that should be it. Make sure you include your closing script tag here. Visual Studio Code automatically included it, but if your text editor doesn't, it's not like CSS where you only need to have the top part. So let's go ahead and save this, jump back over to Google Chrome, give this a refresh, and when we click load, you'll notice that our progress bar loads 10% every 50 milliseconds. We can actually jump back in here to Visual Studio Code and adjust that if you want to play around with it. So let's go ahead and say, let's fill it every, 1,000 milliseconds, which is 1 second. So it should load quite a bit slower than what we had originally. So if we jump over to Google Chrome, refresh, and click load, you'll notice that now it is loading quite a bit slower, 10% every 1 second. So feel free to play around with that. Feel free to play around with the implementation of this. So maybe you don't want to have it load when you click a button, but you want it to load when the window loads, something like that. Feel free to put it in a modal. There's lots of types of things that you can do with this. Just have some fun with it. And let me know if you have any questions or comments in the comment section below. If you have any ideas for future tutorials, I'd also love to see them as well. So thank you for watching and have a great day.